So at this point, well, I'm making it on the anniversary, but I don't think it will be coming out on the anniversary. This video in particular, of course, of the Ukraine war, where Russia has clearly invaded another country for, well, the expressed purposes of territorial expansion. There's no really ways you can can cut this. I know there are other people out there who will disagree and say no. NATO, for some, I don't know, reason, somehow managed to start this war. That Euromaidan was somehow a color revolution, and I've even seen some people go as far as to say that the elections that the Ukrainians had between the Euromaidan and up to even electing Zelensky were undemocratic and shouldn't count, and that the Ukrainian current government is completely undemocratic in how it is being run. But you have to really stretch your definitions for that claim to actually fit. That's for certain. But of course, we are coming up to certainly the anniversary, and of course, we are probably coming up to a period, certainly over the next 2 months, where there probably is not going to be a lot of action because we are now coming up to the point where the frost and the mud is going to play almost basically a complete stopping point and bring this war to, at least for the next 2 months, a halt. Not permanently, of course. There will still be a lot of artillery duels going on, as we've seen throughout the war. But in terms of big movements, or shall we say dramatic actions, we're probably not going to see a lot because the mud in Ukraine, well, it gets muddy, very, very muddy. So before we go into what China has proposed as a potential peace plan for this, but I don't think this is. I think this is a complete non-starter, to be honest, because I do not think it again acknowledges the reality that Russia is acting like a complete madman, and it is making demands of the stuff that it essentially wants. Hence why Zelensky has already said, yeah, this peace plan, it very much favors the aggressor. And of course, Zelensky has sort of dismissed it, but he is asked to actually meet Xi Jinping. So whether that will actually happen or not, we don't know. But hey, we'll see. So before we do go diving into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and an organizational link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So, what are these 12 points that are being proposed, pardon me, by China? So, the first one is a biggie, but again, I do not think it really appreciates the crazy proposals that Russia has been putting forward, but also what Russia has done in this war. So the first point is that the sovereignty of all countries is respected. Now, what? How does that How does that factor in? Remember that Russia has had these referendums, and I say referendums in the loosest term, but it has had these referendums, and it has basically claimed 4 territories of Ukraine. How does this respect the sovereignty of Ukraine when these referendums have basically snatched away 4 very big territories from Ukraine? It really doesn't. It doesn't really make a lot of sense when you think about it. And how is um, China going to ensure, for example, that if it wants to be sort of a neutral arbiter and sort of bring about an end to this war, how does it deal with that? Because Russia is going to insist that those territories remain Russia, and Ukraine is going to insist that those territories are returned to Ukraine. Whose sovereignty at that point does China respect? So the next point is abandoning the Cold War mentality. And it's a bit odd to what they actually mean by this. Like Cold War mentality. Do you mean to stop viewing Russia as the enemy? Does this maybe mean they want to um have NATO be disbanded? It's not 100% clear what this really actually means, especially at this point. Because to be honest, a Cold War mentality could almost mean anything um, at this point. Who knows what they actually mean by this? The next one is, of course, it's in fact the next two really, to be honest, are um, very easy: a ceasing of hostilities and a resuming of peace talks. So for those, are the next two. But again, how do we know that these peace talks, if they were to actually do it, that Russia does not do these in bad faith? That while these peace talks are ongoing, it doesn't, reinforce its position in these captured territories. Basically, just go, sorry, but these territories are ours. This is why everyone has been very clear. And to be honest, any real serious peace proposal, or at least any attempt to at least maintain or at least bring peace to this, then the first point really should be that Russia should completely remove all its forces from Ukraine. That should really be the first point of any serious peace proposal, because Russia here is the aggressor. That is the key point here. And what should also happen is that once that happens, Ukraine's military goes up to the border and reestablishes control of the border. And that includes Donetsk and Luhansk. Because until Russian troops are fully withdrawn from Ukraine, you really cannot have any serious peace talks or any real cessation to hostilities in Ukraine. So the next part, resolving the humanitarian crisis. I suppose this means two parts to this, because obviously the war in Ukraine has caused a lot of serious food crisis. Like I say, Ukraine is one of the fifth largest producers of grain in the world. And certainly the areas that Russia has invaded are very, very, very big areas of farmland and do produce a lot of grain. So that is certainly one potential of it. The other, of course, is the fact that, Russia has been continuously bombing not only just areas in and around the front line, but it has been bombarding other places that are not on the front line, causing other serious problems. Again, so I would hope that does at least target, shall we say, the humanitarian crisis that Russia has created. And this is, of course, you'll notice, this is why we've said at the beginning, a lot of these points are very, very neutral. Doesn't really mention Russia, but here's the thing: who really caused this humanitarian crisis? It wasn't Ukraine; it was Russia. So the next point is protecting civilians and prisoners of war. Yep, sure. Well, fine with that. No problem with that. The next point after that, keeping nuclear power plants safe. I think everyone agrees, obviously, with the situation around Zaporozhye, as we saw played out through the year. It has been Russia that used artillery on a nuclear power plant. Like, causing a lot of people, especially in of a specialist in that nuclear power plant safety regard, to go, this has never happened before. We've never had a nuclear power plant be directly shelled. And if things are even to be believed now, even in Zaporozhye, they are actually using it as a munition storage plant. So again, keeping nuclear power plants safe, the that particular power plant is in Russia's hands, and they don't really appear to be acting in very safe regards, that's for sure. The next point, reducing strategic risks. What does China mean by reducing strategic risks here? Does it mean that um, Ukraine shouldn't have Western weaponry? It mean well, again, there's these points. What, what does it mean by this exactly? This is what a lot of people I think are trying to sort of figure out in some of these points. But what do you mean by strategic risks? Do you mean limiting maybe the threat of war in the future? Um, do we mean it could mean a range of things because who knows? But unfortunately, there wasn't a larger sort of expanding on these points. Maybe there is somewhere else, but I haven't actually seen these expanded on these points. The next point is facilitating grain exports. That grain export deal that had been negotiated last March does come up again for renegotiation in March. Ultimately, I highly suspect Russia will probably use that renegotiation maybe as some sort of forceful way to try and put pressure on certainly countries around the world to try and, shall we say, end this conflict in their favor, which again would be very, very bad for everyone else. But hey, there you go. Next one, stopping unilateral sanctions. Absolutely not. Until this war is brought to a complete stop and Russian forces have been fully withdrawn from Ukraine, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever that these sanctions should end. And I think China, to be honest, is very scared about these sanctions because it would love to go and invade Taiwan. But it is now worried that if it ever did something similar, like what Russia has done here, that it now may have, or at least have to face these unilateral sanctions, which would cripple its economy. So maybe it's a play for the future, but at the moment, absolutely not. You do not want to stop these sanctions unless Russia has fully withdrawn all its troops from Ukrainian territory. And until that has happened, and until there has been a peace has been signed and the peace has been secured, then these aren't withdrawn instantly. They are slowly phased out to basically ensure that Russia does not go back on the offensive. Next point, keeping industrial and supply chains stable. Again, Ukraine, this war has destabilized a lot of supply chains. So again, understand that from again China's perspective. Like I say, this war has destabilized a lot of supply chains, not just in Europe but around the world. So okay, we get that. And of course, the final one, promoting post-conflict reconstruction. Okay, we get that. Uh, fair enough. That makes sense. But there are some in here which are absolutely crazy. Like you cannot just cease hostilities and basically just start assuming peace talks without the complete removal of Russian soldiers from Ukrainian soil. And again, the first point, the sovereignty of all countries respected. Well, Russia has claimed 4 territories of Ukraine as its territory. And if China is going to act as a neutral arbiter in this, whose sovereignty does it rely on? Who does it side with in that? And abandoning the Cold War mentality, if we say that it really is just get rid of NATO, then I'm sorry, but there is a very clear example that we can use here of other countries, namely the Baltics, certainly Finland, um, again, parts of Poland, Moldova, as we saw very early on. If you may remember, when Lukashenko leaked the invasion plans, there were very, very clear intentions for after Russia had finished with Ukraine to go and invade Moldova next. That would have been a potential next target. So it's obviously very, very strange that China would put these out, but not too surprising, of course. It has remained neutral at the recent UN vote, which again they won on saying condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I think China keeping neutral does make sense because obviously it views sort of Russia as a potential ally. It's part of the whole BRICS alliance as a very sort of anti sort of Western alliance grouping. Hasn't really sort of come together, hasn't really sort of proved itself. In fact, really, the Ukraine war has really just showed that these BRICS, when they were really challenged or put to a serious test, this wall completely fell and collapsed. Um, what will happen next in this? Who knows? We'll see how the rest of the war plays out. But um, signs are, to be honest, very good for the Ukrainians. Very, very good indeed. And the longer this goes on, the less it really is in favor for Russia. Their economy is really in tatters. No matter how much they try and prop it up, sooner or later, those wheels are going to come off. We've seen numerous reports about the air safety industry and their aviation industry in general has completely completely been hollowed out because it had been incredibly reliant on getting Western parts for these aircraft. We've heard the stories about them cannibalizing other aircraft just so they can even keep current aircraft flying. We know that their train network is again going through the exact same thing. So if that train network fails, then they're going to be facing other huge logistical problems down in Ukraine. Um, you've certainly got the potential of Putin maybe being overthrown, maybe being couped. All kinds of things could happen this year. Could happen this year, and who knows? But ultimately, I think this will end in a Ukrainian victory. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.